Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today we are talking about Star Wars The Bad Batch Season 3, Episodes 1, 2, and 3 that have just been released on February 21st of 2024. We're going to be talking about all three episodes in one video, spoilers ahead. And if you haven't seen the episodes, watch them first, come back, because I don't want to be responsible for unleashing anything that you guys don't know about. So let's start off with Episode 1, Confined. The first thing we see immediately right off the bat is a recap of Season 2 that lasts for 2 minutes and 13 seconds. The Empire has risen, the Republic has fallen. Clone troopers are now being either excommunicated by the Empire and or are being taken to multiple facilities to be studied and to be tested for their genetic material to find out the best ways to replicate the cloning process that the Kaminoans have been so expertly using for God knows how long. The entire recap ends with the death of Tech, the abduction of Omega, being taken to Tantus, and Hunter saying, "We will get her back no matter what." The only two individuals in the Bad Batch so far that are still alive and that are still actively out there in the galaxy, with the exception of Omega and Crosshair, who are on Tantus, are Wrecker and Hunter. The first pieces of news scene that we see on the Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 1, is the ruthlessness of the Empire and the ruthlessness of Dr. Hemlock. The idea basically is that there is a ship that is flying through, about to land, it crashes, and Hemlock basically says they are expendable. Not only is this already showing the earliest stages of the Empire and how ruthless they can be and how they believe that all clone troopers, all stormtroopers, regardless of who they are, where they were from, are all expendable in the eyes of the Empire. The next thing we see in Episode 1 is Omega. Omega is basically a prisoner on Tanis. She is required to give blood samples, take them to Nala Se, and have these blood samples examined and determined on whether or not they have the proper M count. Of course, the M count also known as being midichlorians. So obviously, her blood is being used for midichlorian counts, and her blood is being used for something extremely devious that we might find out about later. Meanwhile, Omega, on her way to do this, every single day walks by Crosshair, who is being taken to probably some sort of interrogation. Also, I want to point out this next part. They have this weird hallway that has laser beams that's covered in red. Reminds me of the fucking hallway from Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, but I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was hilarious. And one of Omega's final duties is taking care of these weird dog creatures. I can't remember their names for the life of me. And basically managing their food, how much water they get, and basically how they are fed. She does develop or start to develop a relationship with this one creature, but we will talk about that later. And the last we see of Omega during this first half of the episode is her talking to Crosshair, trying to acknowledge him as a human being, trying to talk to him as a regular person, but Crosshair does not want any of it. Crosshair wants to be alone, he wants to be left alone, and he wants to not interact with Omega. Crosshair is finally down the path that he doesn't want to be down, and Omega wants to pull him out. Omega's final shot in this first half of the episode is her with her new doll and a shot of the blood samples. The next day, she marks the wall, takes a blood sample, goes to visit Lama Su, but now she goes to the kennels and she finds that one of the creatures is now injured. Omega, being the kind of person that she is, immediately tries to make a connection with the creature, and she heals its wounds after some resistance. After having a quick talk with Crosshair, Crosshair announces and tells her that he deserves to be in here, and he does not deserve to be treated like this by her. The next day, there's a surprise inspection, and this clone lady finds Omega's new doll. After doing her usual rounds and feeding in the kennels, she finds out that her new friend is about to be put down, and she fights back, immediately freeing the new pet known as Batcher and setting them off into the wilderness. Dr. Hemlock, being the absolute creepshow that he is, tells Omega that there's not a good chance that Batcher will survive out there in the wild without any survival instincts, given the fact that Badger has effectively been out there domesticated by the Empire, and how her punishment will now involve possibly Crosshair being eliminated as well. And the final shot of the episode involves her new friend Badger surviving out in the wilderness, which also includes the clone lady returning Omega back her doll, showing that she might have some sympathy for her younger sister. This episode already was pretty good for its own. It's a great first episode premiere to show how dark this new season is going to be, and I absolutely love the tone that they're taking with this episode. I give this episode an 8 out of 10. Now we're moving on to episode 2. Episode 2 of season 3 is simply titled Paths Unknown. In the very first scene of this episode, we have a member of a crime syndicate, a captain specifically, who is being charged with disgracing the family and plotting a conspiracy against the family members. The captain is found guilty and he's dropped through a ray shield to his death. Hunter and Wrecker immediately set onto the scene where they have a member of the Pike Syndicate in their custody, and they hand them over to the Crime Syndicate family in exchange for a piece of information. The information specifically being the location of an Imperial facility where they could possibly find Omega. The Crime Syndicate family immediately hands it over, and without any prep time and without any time to consider their options, Hunter immediately wants to go to the facility so they can try to find Omega. Immediately upon arriving on the planet, Hunter and Wrecker seek out the Imperial facility and immediately find that the entire facility had been destroyed through orbital bombardment. Hunter, obviously not wanting to give up on Omega, wants to go down to the facility to search for any information that could be relevant on their search to find Omega and scientist Hemlock. While attempting to head down to the facility, Hunter and Wrecker immediately find themselves in the presence of two individuals. Not just any particular individuals, clone troopers. Clone children, to be specific. The clone children have been surviving out here ever since the Empire destroyed the facility, and they are going to take them to their main leader, who will give them information on Hemlock and the possibility of a new individual site. Upon meeting the Meter Mox, Hunter and Wrecker immediately double back to the ship so they can grab Gonk to use him as a power supply, since the entire facility does not have power after the orbital bombardment. Upon getting inside, however, a horror movie enters the fray, as these weird little spider creatures that are plants start making their way through the base. Meanwhile, the children clone troopers who are left behind immediately make a decision on what they are going to do, and it seems as though they are going to take Hunter and Wrecker's ship. Upon finding the central databank, the clone troopers try to gain access to the central computer and through the archives, but are immediately come upon by the weird spider creatures, and immediately find one of the most horrifying things imaginable in Star Wars history, a plant swamp Sarlacc. The two other child clones decide to take the Marauder, put it over the hatch where Hunter, Wrecker, and their brother are trying to gain access to the data. The swamp Sarlacc appears, and they decide to drop a couple of thermal detonators onto it before dropping enough explosives down its gullet to set off a damn nuke, in which Hunter and Wrecker decide to take in these new clones as fellow brothers in arms and discover that there is another location for another base somewhere out there in the galaxy. Very nice episode, action-packed, filled to the brim with horror elements that might give away what's going to be going down for the zombie show that's going to happen later on. I'm very excited, but either way, let's move on to episode 3. I give this a 7.5 out of 10. Episode 3 of The Bad Batch Season 3 is simply labeled Shadows of Tantus. In this episode, we have Omega and we have Crosshair. Omega still going through with being a prisoner on Tantus, while Crosshair is still reeling over his re-education and his indoctrination by the hands of the Empire. But there is a sudden change happening on Tantus, because now there is an unexpected visitor that is wanting to inspect the facility, and we can only guess who it might be. Which means that Lama Su will be disposed of, and will not be able to main the laboratory so she can get rid of blood samples from Omega. Lama Su, fearing Omega's life, instructs her to destroy her blood sample or to possibly get out of the facility within the measured time, or she will be in grave danger. Omega, taking the initiative, does not have the capabilities to destroy the blood sample, so she decides to steal a data pad and is willing to run with Crosshair to try and escape the facility. And in the next scene, we discover that the individual who is coming to inspect the facility is none other than the Lord Emperor himself, Sheev Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious. Walking through the facility, we discover that the project that Hemlock has been working on is Project Necromancy, also known as the very same project that Palpatine uses to resurrect himself back in Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Omega finally makes the decision and has the confidence to escape on her own whims, going through an elevator and going to release Crosshair so the two of them can escape together and manage to fight their way through several stormtroopers before eventually finding their way through the kennels. Project Necromancy, on the other hand, seems to have some sort of Sith-esque feel to it, as each and every one of these compartments is actually a cloning pod, probably meant to make clones of Palpatine so he can then transfer his Force essence into a clone whenever they finally get the right midichlorian count, so he can be connected to the dark side of the Force once again and effectively become immortal. And Hemlock is extremely pleased with receiving the amount of research credit that he gains and with the abilities that he is now being provided by the very Emperor himself. Hemlock, immediately recognizing that Omega couldn't have escaped the facility without help, immediately arrests Lama Su, after which they release the Hounds and they immediately go after Omega and Crosshair while they are trying to track down the crashed shuttle at the very first episode. Omega and Crosshair soon reach the crashed shuttle. Not being able to use it, they then ensue into a firefight with the clone commando and the stormtroopers, immediately taking over the shuttle that they were using to track them down and use it to escape the planet and finally jump into hyperspace, with Hemlock not wanting to destroy the ship because of his fear of losing Omega, the very thing that they need to manage to complete his work. Also, Batcher is the best boy, and he ends up on the ship with Omega and Crosshair as Omega's new pet. So at the end of the day, this episode was really well done, and now with Crosshair and Omega free, now we can ensue into trying to reunite the Bad Batch. So far, this has been a great season 3. I give this episode an 8 out of 10. This entire show has been great so far. I can't wait to see more of it, and I can't wait for you to listen to my next review and my next recap. Until then, see you later.